Hello students, I'm Anita Abraham, Associate Professor of English. Welcome to the English classroom. This is video number 12 dated 30/7/2020. Today's English lesson is from Semester 3, Unit 3 of the General English curriculum prescribed by Osmania University for students of BA, BCom, BSc and BBA. Today's topic is a poem from Unit 3 titled As I Grew Older by the famous Black American poet Langston Hughes. If you like my video, please subscribe and press the bell icon so that you get notified of subsequent videos. Let's get started. Semester 3, Unit 3, the poem is titled As I Grew Older by Langston Hughes. Before we do the poem, let's learn something about the poet. Langston Hughes was born in 1902 and passed away in 1967. He was a leading writer and thinker of the Harlem Renaissance, and it's very important to understand Harlem Renaissance. It's an African American artistic movement that began in the 1920s and celebrated African life and culture. And it is highly relevant today because I'm sure students, you are abreast with what's happening around the world, and all of you all are aware of how the Black Lives Matter movement is raging in America, and it is spreading across the world in different contexts. And so we see a revival of the Harlem Renaissance, a celebration of the African American life and culture that Langston Hughes was part of. And it is very relevant that we are doing Langston Hughes's poem today in today's context, and that it is part of our curriculum too. Now, moving on, he started writing at a very young age and rose to fame with his poetry collection, which was called the Beery Blues in 1926, and Fine Clothes to the Jews in 1927. These were collections of poems, and it celebrated Black life and culture. Okay, he was one of the early inventors of jazz poetry. Jazz music is associated with Black musicians, and he, what you call, is famous for what is called jazz poetry, which again is vibrant, is lively, and celebrates Black American life and culture. Okay, Hughes condemned racism and purported equality and celebrated Afro-American life, culture, and spirituality through his poetry, novels, plays, and essays. And so when we are doing the poem today, it is really so relevant because he wrote the poem so many years back, but it is so many decades back, and today in the 2020s also it's so highly relevant because there's a movement, Black Lives Matter, that is fighting for promoting equality and celebrating African American life, culture, and it is relevant across the world where there is disparity, where there is discrimination based on color, creed, caste, religion. So the poem is highly significant in today's world. Something about the poet. As I Grew Older was first published in 1925. So it's almost, you can say, 95 years ago, the poet wrote about the Black, movement celebrating Black lives. And today in 2020, we have a similar movement almost 95 years later happening. So see how art mirrors life and literature, and it is eternal. Okay, so there is this kind of what do you call relevance across centuries, across decades, and it's almost 95 years, which is a century. Okay, we old the poem is, but still relevant today. And it is included in Langston Hughes's first collection of poems, The Weary Blues, which was published a year later in 1926. So remember the year of the poem, 1925, and remember the year that we are in, 2020. Okay, 95 years ago, and still the poem is relevant. The poem is about one's dream in life, the hardship one has to endure, and the strong will one needs to have in order to achieve one's goal and realize one's dream. And it becomes relevant because the poet is Afro-American, and how difficult it was in the 1920s for that is even before the civil rights movement. It was before Martin Luther King. So the Harlem Renaissance was just the beginning of the civil rights movement, and they didn't have voting rights. Okay, they were treated as second-rate citizen. And then you had Martin Luther King in the 1960s, when you had the civil right movement, and then the black or the Afro Americans also got equal rights and opportunities. So the poet is talking about a time when they didn't have there was no equality. And what is strange is today, after 95 years, we are talking about the same thing. Okay, the Black Lives Matter movement is really talking about the same thing that the poet was talking about almost 95 years back. Okay, it is easy to dream, says the poet. The dreams do provide source of inspiration, and we all need to dream. Okay, we need to have aspirations, goals, but a determined effort is needed to transform dreams into reality. And that goes without saying for all of us. But what the poet is trying to say is, because of his color, because of the racism and discrimination that he encounters in his context in America, it becomes very difficult for him to transform his dreams into reality. He uses the wall in the poem. When we listen to the poem, when we do the poem, you'll realize how he uses the wall as a very evocative symbol of something that's stopping him. The wall is the boundary, the barrier that is stopping him from achieving his goals and realizing his dreams. Hughes alerts us to the obstacles and challenges that lies in the path of realizing one's dream, and all the more so when one is an Afro-American in and realizing one's dream becomes even more difficult in their context. Okay, uh, the journey is doubly difficult for the speaker, the poet, the narrator of the poem, because of the discrimination he faces as an African American person. The poem thus dramatizes the anguish of those who are victims of racial discrimination. So the Black Lives Matter, you've been hearing about George Floyd. Okay, I can't breathe. I can't breathe has become a symbol of not having equal opportunities, not being allowed the same kind of space that others have in the world. And it applies to every context where there is discrimination, whether it is against women, whether it is on the basis of religion, caste, creed, color. So the poem has become very significant in today's context. And the poet, by juxtaposing, that is putting together light and shadow, mirroring light and shadow, turns the conflict between hope and despair into a universal experience. So he's talking about a personal experience, and it can be applied to universal experience, not only in the Afro-American context of the 1920s, but also relevant today, almost a century later, and in various contexts wherever there is despair, where people are, discriminated, devalued because of various reasons. All right. So the poem has a universal appeal. All right. Moving on. Let's see. Let's listen to the poem As I Grew Older by Langston Hughes, and I want you to concentrate on the title As I Grew Older. So, as you grow older, you realize certain things. Certain things become clear to you, that you are not allowed to do certain things because of, in this case, the color of his skin, maybe because of one's religion, one's caste, because of one's gender, okay, or sexual preferences. So the central theme of the poem is discrimination, and as we become older and aware of the things around us, okay, the perspectives, the opinions, the viewpoints around us, we realize the obstacles and the barriers that surround us. And so the poem has universal appeal, and it is very, very relevant in whatever kind of reading that you want to give it. So let's listen to the poem first, and then we will As I Grew Older by
It was
Langston
a
Hughes.
long time ago. I've almost forgotten my dream. But it was there then, in front of me, bright like a sun, my dream. And then the wall rose slowly, slowly between me and my dream. Rose slowly, slowly, dimming, hiding the light of my dream. Rose until it touched the sky, the wall. Shadow. I am black. I lie down in the shadow. No longer the light of my dream before me, above me. Only the thick wall. Only the shadow. My hands, my dark hands, break through the wall. Find my dream. Help me to shatter this darkness, to smash this night, to break this shadow into 1,000 lights of sun, into 1,000 whirling dreams of sun.
I hope you see this picture. It shows about the protest, okay? And you must remember Langston Hughes wrote protest poetry. So let's try to analyze the poem, and to help us understand what the poet is trying to convey through his poem. Like I said earlier, Langston Hughes is a very famous African American poet, social activist, novelist, playwright, and was recognized as a very important literary figure who lived at a time when racial oppression and discrimination against the black people, or the Afro American people, were rampant. And like I said earlier, he is relevant today because of what's happening in today's world. He was born on the 1st of February 1902 in Missouri, and Langston was involved in the civil rights movement and wrote what is called protest poetry. He believed that poetry and art can bring about change and equality in the society. And that's why this poem is highly relevant. He was also part of, like I said earlier, the Harlem Renaissance, from where this, black equality movement started, which ended in the civil rights movement. And he was one of the first poets to promote African American culture, such as jazz music. His poems are also called jazz poetry, known for its free flow and expression. And that's what we see in the poem. Langston Hughes was very concerned about creating the African American poetry as an independent genre in world literature, and he achieved that. Okay, so it is a separate literary genre today. Coming to the poem, As I Grew Older, is a poem about the dream that the poet is unable to achieve because of racial subjugation and discrimination. The poet in his childhood had dreams, but as time passed, as he grew older, he realized that he is subjugated to racial prejudices and oppression. Okay, the poet begins the poem with a dream that the poet had a long time ago as a child. Okay, the poet says that his dream was as bright as the sun right in front of him until a wall rose between him and his dream. Okay, the poet is older now, and he's thinking about his dream which he dreamt long ago. He thinks he has almost forgotten his dream. He remembers that his dream was not fulfilled because of the strong barrier, the wall created by the white people who would not allow him to realize his dream because he was subjugated to racial discrimination. The wall seems, the barrier, okay, that prevents him from achieving his dream seems to grow forever and ever, and it become so large that it has almost touched the sky and has cast a shadow. Okay, and because of that, the sun is blocked. Okay, the blackness and the sun being blocked, the shadow, or powerful symbols to show or highlight the racial discrimination that the poet felt as a Afro-American. Okay, the wall has become a long dark shadow which has been blocking his dream. The dream is now replaced by a shadow. The poet is black, and his dreams have also turned black, okay, in the shadow of the wall. He is unable to realize it, and it is not clear any longer to him. The poet lies down beside the shadow, which means he feels defeated and helpless. Okay, he finds that his dream is no longer above him, and so he feels vanquished because the sun is blocked because of the wall that has grown so huge. Okay, and it's blocking the sun. Instead of his dreams, he finds the thick wall and the shadow above him. A plausible interpretation can be that the dreams of freedom and independence is no longer real for the black people, and it has been overshadowed by the wall created by the white people. Okay, so you must remember that it is in the poem was written in 1925, and it was when the Harlem Renaissance was just gaining momentum. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and it is in that context that the poet is writing. And so often, they would encounter such racial discrimination and oppression and subjugation that they would feel defeated and helpless, and that is reflected in the poem. The wall being so thick, the wall being so tall, the sun being blocked, living in the shadows, all this conveying the helplessness that the the fighters of equality would have felt at that particular point. And strangely, it is still so relevant 95 years later. All right. The dark hands that the poet refers to are his own hands, the color of his skin. Who will be able to break through the wall and find his dream? So the black dark hands wanting to break the wall and to find the dreams that he has lost. Okay, help me to shatter this darkness. So you see the pain, the agony that the poet is feeling, and it is an expression of the collective anguish of the entire Afro-American race. The poet wants to break the wall, shatter the darkness that is keeping him from attaining his dreams, individually and collectively for his race. He wants to break the shadow into 1,000 fragments of sun and 1,000 whirling dreams. So his individual dream and also the collective dream of the entire Afro-American race. Okay, so it becomes a powerful cry, not only for the poet personally, but he's also the voice that's representing his entire race. All right, the poem is in negative is a voice against the negative effects of racism, prejudice, discrimination. It is a comment on any form of oppression where one is not able to achieve their dream. So you can, see it in the context that the poet is writing almost a century later, in the context of what is happening in today's world, and also in various other contexts where oppression is taking place in any kind of oppression can be of any kind, and the poem becomes relevant. The oppression, the inability to realize one's dream, achieve one's goal. It can be because of age, gender, nationality, religion, caste, creed, and in this case, race. The poem puts out the message that we should believe in ourselves, stand up against the unjust society that's trying to oppress us, and rise above any sort of discrimination. That is what is the universal appeal of the poem. Okay. Now, when we are talking about the tone of the poem, which is also, or the mood of the poem, that becomes very important because it has relevance in today's context also. It keeps changing, if you have noticed, as the poem progresses. From in lines 1 to 6, if we go, you see that the speaker's voice is optimistic, naive, innocence. He talks about the dream. Okay, it was as bright as the sun. In the next 7 lines, okay, in the next line 7 to 16, the tone turns depressing. It's there is anger in it also. And when you move on, okay, well, let's say from line 17 to 23, there is this tone of pessimism and anger in the speaker's voice. As the poem progresses, you see that from optimism it moves to anger, and then pessimism, and and finally towards the end, the final lines 23 to 33, there is hope, and the whole stanza expresses that maybe there will be a time when he can achieve his dream, that he will be able to smash the darkness, break out of the shadow, and there will be 1,000 lights of sun, and there will be thousands of whirling dreams of sun. So personally and talking collectively about his race, the Afro-American race, the poem's changing tone is very, very interesting. It signifies the speaker, the poet's changing perspective of life as he moves from childhood to adulthood. You must always remember the title of the poem, As I Grew Older. So the perspective is also changing, the tone is also changing. Lines 1 to 6 shows the speaker's viewpoint as a child, as a young child, the sun, the dream. I had a dream. Lines 7 to 16 reflect the change in the speaker's viewpoint as a young man, the discrimination, the oppression, the subjugation that he faced. Lines 24 to 33 show the present perspective of the speaker, that the time that is the time when he composed the poem. Okay, so you see there is a dramatic shift in the mood and the tone of the poem, and that reflects the poet's inner self, and also a reflection of how the Harlem Renaissance was progressing. Okay, so as a movement, because the poet was a public figure fighting for the rights of his race. So it is the poem is a reflection of the poet's journey, inward journey, and the outward journey as a public figure. Now, when you look at the structure of the poem, it is in one stanza, and it is in free verse with irregularity of the length of lines. Okay, there is no specific rhyme scheme, and the diction, the language that he uses is simple but very lucid and clear, which makes the words uh, you know, uh, very easy to understand, and the theme is conveyed very clearly to the reader, because that's the point the poet wants to make, that everybody should understand the central idea, the anguish of the poet. Okay, since there is no regular rhyme scheme, the poet has used you see the poet repeating words like dream, shadow, rose, dark, hands, thousand, sun. There is a repetition of certain words. Okay, the lexicon of the poem, the words are used to convey meaning, to reiterate, reinforce the central theme of the poem. Now, talking about the imagery, it's a powerful blend, if you have noticed, of the light and dark images. Okay, light symbolizing hope, dream, optimism, possibilities, intellectual achievement, awareness, and on the other hand, darkness symbolizing prejudice, discrimination, hatred, racism, ignorance. So you see a juxtaposition of light and dark images, and conveying very different things. Okay, and the use of the words dark hands symbolizes the color of the poet's skin. Okay, he's a black poet, representing the Afro-American uh, uh, collective consciousness. Okay, the speaker believes that he can break through the barriers of being born with a darker skin tone in a predominantly white society. I am black and my dark hands are examples of blunt truthfulness used by the poet in his poem. As I grew older, the height of the wall has been exaggerated. Okay, it grew and grew. You remember the poet saying, saying how the wall was growing and growing, and it is exaggerated to stress on the vastness of the problems and hindrances that are confronting the black people, and the oppression that the black people are facing in America. So the wall is a symbol of barrier that they are unable to bring down. Okay, the wall has been used as a metaphor in the poem. The wall is presented as a barrier or an obstacle for the poet achieving his dream, and all the black people collectively achieving their dreams. Okay, it's a barrier to their progress. It is a barrier to their dreams. It stands in the way of achieving what they want. Okay, the obstacle is racism and discrimination that the black people, the Afro-American, collectively face as a race. The poet feels defeated, pessimistic towards the middle of the poem, but at the same time, he's not going to give up his dream, because if you give up his dream, then you are accepting what is being dished out or meted out to you. His dark hands, he says, will help him to shatter the metaphoric wall which has been created in a predominantly white society, and he says it will destroy racism and hatred and discrimination that the Afro-American people are facing for centuries. And another, what do you call, element that I want to draw your attention to in the poem is the poet's use of exclamation. Okay, just, yes, let's see how he has used exclamation in the poem. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have again 5. Do you see that? The exclamation used by the poet, and he has used it 5 times. The exclamatory mark is very interesting. Exclamations determine emotions and energy in expressing some idea. Okay, they are also used as loud commands or gestures. Okay, let me take you back to that. Okay, so my hands, my dark hands, break through the wall, find my dream of and then of the sun. Okay, the whole stanza goes together. Okay, so they are used as loud commands or gestures. The use of exclamation in the poem As I Grew Older indicates the poet's motivation to break out of this oppression. 5 times the use of exclamation. The entire poem is in one verse. The verses are short yet punchy. They are dramatic, forceful, short, implying the speaker's repetitive outbursts of effort to break the barrier, break the wall of discrimination and oppression. I hope you have been able to appreciate the poem, students, especially in the context of what is happening in the world today, not only the Black Lives Matter movement, but oppression that we see every day in our lives in some form or the other. Before we do the comprehension question and a critical appreciation of the poem, let's look at the glossary, the important words, the new words that we have learned that the poet has used. Let's look at some of the words that the poet has used very, very dramatically. Shatter. Shatter means to break into very small pieces. Smash, to break into many pieces suddenly, noisily, and violently. These are all verbs that convey so much of feeling and emotions. Okay, whirling is spinning, rotating, turning around quickly, round and round. These are some of the words that the poet has used. Now let's move on to the comprehension questions so that you understand the poem better. So let's look at the first question. What did the poet have a long time ago and what happened to it? So what did the poet have a long time ago? He had a dream. And what happened? It was shattered. He could not achieve it. And slowly it was forgotten because of the racial prejudices and oppression that he felt along the way as he grew older. Now, second question, what does the poet compare his dream to? Why do you think he chose to make this comparison? Okay, so what does the poet compare his dream to the sun? And why does he choose to compare? Because it is bright, it is full of hope. It is something that spreads positivity, and as a young child, you're filled with hope and positivity and confidence that you will achieve your dream. And that is why he chooses to compare it with the sun, because there is nothing else brighter and more dramatic and invincible than the sun. Okay, and then for that not to be fulfilled shows the irony of the black lives or the Afro-American lives in America. Let's look at the comprehension question number 3. The poet says that he has almost forgotten his dream. What made him forget it? What made him forget his dream is, as he grew older, he realized that there are obstacles, there are barriers of oppression, discrimination, subjugation in the predominantly white society that they are part of, and the African American race are not given the same rights and not treated equally. And slowly, this beautiful dream that he had to give up, because as he grew older, the walls of or the obstacles of subjugation, oppression made him realize that it may not be possible for him to achieve his dream. Question number 4, and then the wall rose. Is it really a wall that the poet is referring to? He's not talking about a physical wall. It is a metaphor for the obstacle, the oppression that the Afro-American race is subjected to in the predominantly white American society. Okay, so that is the reference to the wall. Okay, it's not an actual wall. It is a metaphor for oppression, subjugation, and discrimination of the Afro-American race in the predominantly white American society. How does the poet hope to recover his dream? Okay, he how does and it's very, very dramatic, and we were talking about the exclamation marks, the 5 exclamation marks that are there in the poem. His dark hands are going to shatter the wall, and it and then he's going to achieve his dreams, and it is good, and that sun is going to be broken into thousands of pieces of light, and there will be dreams whirling around. So what the poet is trying to do is, as an individual, as a Black American, and collectively as the Afro American race, they need to fight against the racial discrimination, the subjugation, oppression that they have been undergoing for centuries, and recover their dream, grab their dreams back, because it is their right, because they are also part of the society and they need to be given equal status, equal right in the American society. The poet uses various words to suggest light and darkness. List out the words. We did that. We had a very beautiful what do you call use of you know mix of the light and dark images, and the light symbolizing dream, hope, optimism, possibility, is goodness, and then the darkness symbolizing prejudice, discrimination, hatred, racism, and ignorance. So the poet uses these words, and uses the light and darkness, dark images of shadow, sun, and all to convey, okay, the convey and juxtapose two very different perspectives. Describe the poet bringing together the color of his skin with the state of his mind. Okay, so the color of his skin, dark, the state of his mind is also bleak. It is also full of sadness and pessimism, because as he grows older, he realizes that his dreams, his goals cannot be achieved because of that terrible wall of racial discrimination and oppression that he and his race encounter in every aspect of their life every day. So the color of his skin, the dark color of his skin, also mirroring the state of mind, his pessimism, his anger against the racial discrimination that he and his race is subjected to every day for centuries. Look at the title of the poem and explain its relevance to the theme. What is the title of the poem? As I Grew Older. And what is its relevance to the theme? The theme is about racial discrimination. The theme is about, the negative effect of racism, prejudice, and discrimination. It is a comment on any form of racial oppression where one is unable to achieve their dream. Okay, so that is the central theme of the poem. And the poem is a message that we should believe in ourselves and stand up for anything unjust in society, and raise above any form of discrimination. And the title becomes relevant because as you grow older, it is only then that we encounter, even though you encounter as a child, you really don't realize it, but it is only as you grow older that you realize that you are encountering prejudice, discrimination, hatred, racism, and ignorance. So the central theme of the poem is a fight against these terrible, what do you call, things in society like prejudice, discrimination, hatred, racism, ignorance, and you realize this only as you grow older, because then it becomes clearer. Okay, the wall becomes clearer, as the poet says. All right. There are three time frames in the poem. Identify them. We did that earlier. The first is the first to seven lines when he is a child, and he has this dream, and then you have the movement, where he is depressed, pessimistic, angry, as a young man. When he faces the wall, there is his inability to achieve his dream, the sun being blocked, and him lying in the shadow of his dreams, the shadow of the walls, and his inability to realize his dream. That is the second phase. And then you have this third time frame, which is the present, where the poet is writing the poem. He's more mature, and he realizes that his dark hands, individually and collectively as an Afro-American race, they have this, they have to have it as an agenda to break the wall, shatter the wall that is shackling them, and realize their dreams and reach for the sun. Okay, so those are the three time frames, and very beautifully it is demarcated in the poem. And let's look at the 10th comprehension question, which will enable you to understand the poem better. It is, what is the poet's attitude to the towards his dream at the beginning of the poem and at the end? Is it the same, or is there a change? What do you think, students? What is the poet's attitude in the beginning of the poem, and what is his attitude towards his dream in the end of the poem? Do you see a change? Yes, definitely. In the beginning, he's very optimistic. Yes, because he's a child. It is as bright as the sun. Okay, and he wants to achieve his dreams. And as he grows older, older, he realizes there is a wall, the shadow, and he is unable to realize it, and you feel the anger, the frustration, the pessimism, the hatred that the poet has against the white society that the Afro-American race is part of, and the oppression and discrimination that they are being unjustly meted out. So you see the young angry man rebelling against the racism, the discrimination that he is encountering, and and also because he's not able to realize his dream, and he's unable to see the sun. Only the dark shadow is visible to him. The sun is blocked out. He's unable to realize his dream. Not only his dream, collectively for his race too. And then towards the end, you see that there is a more mature kind of approach to the dream. He says his dark hands will shatter. There is a confidence that collectively as a race, they need to work towards shattering the wall that is the obstacle and barrier to achieving their dreams. The poet's dream and the dreams of his entire race. So I hope the comprehension questions have helped you students to understand the poem better. I would love it if you would read up about the Black movement in America, the Harlem Renaissance. It's very interesting. And also, in the present context, it becomes very, very relevant that something that the poet wrote in 1925 is relevant even today in 2020. And that's the beauty of art. That's the beauty of literature. It is eternal, and there is significance, there is symbolism, there is the connect even after decades, and here almost a century. Now, before let's wrap up by attempting a critical appreciation of the poem As I Grew Older by Langston Hughes, so that the poem becomes clearer for you and you will be able to attempt both a summary and a critical appreciation of the poem. So let's quickly attempt a critical appreciation of the poem. The speaker, Langston Hughes, the poet, starts by describing a dream that he used to have a long time ago, that he has since nearly forgotten. He has forgotten it as he has grown older. Back then, however, it was right there in front of him, bright like a sun dream. Okay, a wall slowly rose up between the speaker and his dream. It rose and rose until it touched the sky. The wall then cast a shadow on his dreams, and as the poet, meaning as the poet grew up, he realizes the racial discrimination that is around him. The poet proclaims, I am black, and that is what has caused this wall to rise and cast the shadow. He lies down in the shadow, which prevents the light of the sun, his dreams, from shining on him. All he can see is the thick wall and the shadow. He cries, and that is coming from his heart. So it is the anguish, the pain, the anger, the frustration that he is feeling, the poet is feeling, and he is the collective voice of all the black people. That's very, very important. My hands, exclamation, my dark hands, exclamation again. Okay, he wants to break through the wall and find his dreams. He wants to break apart the darkness and smash the night. He wants the shadow to break apart into 1,000 lights of sun and 1,000 whirling dreams of sun. 1,000 lights of sun, 1,000 whirling dreams of sun, exclamation again, so that it's not only for himself but for all the Afro-American people that he is representing. Okay, as I grew older, the poem is a narrative about the struggle and empowerment of the Afro-American people. In the beginning of the poem, the poet recalls a dream that he had long ago and had nearly forgotten. But now, when he is more mature, okay, when he has come into terms with the actual realities, okay, he can see ahead of him once more. So that's the third phase. So you see the three time frames: the childhood, then the angry young man, frustrated, and then the third phase, which is very important, where he becomes a public leader, a social activist involved in the civil rights movement, and he can see ahead of him and see that they can, break down these walls of oppression and subjugation and get equal rights for the Afro-American people. This is a fairly straightforward symbolism. The speaker represents all African Americans who had to relinquish their dreams due to discrimination and persecution for centuries. And in the early 20th century American society, the African Americans were discriminated against, and African American children may have experienced a few brief years of blissful ignorance, okay, like the poet. He did not know that his race is discriminated against, so he was unaware, and so he dreamt, and his dream was as bright as the sun, okay. But then as he grew older, he realizes the reality of his existence, okay. And as they grow up, the Afro-American children and the poet, we are talking about the poet. If it is personal, then he realizes that he has second-class citizenship, and there is a wall of injustice, and that rises up and touches the sky and blocks the sunlight. Just because the wall has risen, it does not mean the dream ceased to exist, okay? The speaker cannot see it anymore. It is because he is in the shadow. But, he nurtures the dream. It is forgotten, but it is still there. So that is very, very important. Langston Hughes deliberately uses the symbol of a shadow as a way to actualize his character's blackness, because the speaker's race is the barrier that is keeping him from achieving his dream. So that's very, very important. Okay, the use of imagery in the poem. The wall, the shadow, very brilliant use of imagery by the poet. When the narrator describes lying hidden in the shadow, Langston Hughes is actually invoking the depiction of his Afro-American identity. I am an invisible man. And that is why the current Black Lives Matter is so relevant, okay? And George Floyd's I cannot breathe, that has resonance even 95 years back, where the poet is talking about the same thing, okay. As the poem progresses, though the speaker's listlessness and apathy turns to determination and vigor, creating a shift of energy, okay. So you see that from the second part to the third part, you see a shift of energy. The speaker forcefully commands his dark hands to break through the wall so that he can access his dreams, get his dreams back. He's no longer willing to languish, uh, uh, languish and just let his dreams and his hopes go by. He wants to shatter the darkness, smash this night. And Langston Hughes uses violent language to show the speaker is suddenly empowered and feels no anxiety about what he must do. So that is the phase where Langston Hughes is, growing in stature as a social activist, and he's involved in the civil rights movement. And from a young man, you see him maturing into an important civil rights activist. Okay, so you see that shift. The concluding image of the poem is brilliant, as the speaker imagines the shadow breaking into thousands of fragments of sunlight and liberating whirling dreams of sun for the entire Afro-American race. By confronting the obstacle, the discrimination, the subjugation, the oppression that the Afro-American race experiences in a predominantly white society, the speaker finds his voice and his purpose. So this is very important, and though there is inherent risk in the speaker's decision to shatter the thick wall, the largely affirmative tone of the second half of the poem seems to suggest that even if he fails, there is self-realization to grasp for a dream that may be out of reach at present, but in future, definitely it is a possibility. And that became a possibility with Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement that happened in the 1960s. The reality of Black lives that the poet portrays is still so true. It's so true even today, 95 years later. Okay, and that's why we have the mass movement Black Lives Matter, and it is sweeping the world, and it is addressing in it is addressing contexts across the globe where there is discrimination of any time. Okay, uh, uh, it is a fight for identity. Okay, whether it is individual identity or collective identity of a group, and it is the basic right of every individual and every group to have identity and basic rights. Okay, I hope, students, that you have learned to appreciate the powerful message that the poet is trying to convey through the poem. It is very easy for us to understand the pain and anguish that the poet expresses, because it's a reality in the Indian context where there is a wide disparity in our society based on socio-economic conditions that exist in our society. Try to draw a parallel between our situation, the Indian situation, and what the poet is trying to talk about. Okay, thank you, students. Do attempt a summary of the poem and try to attempt a critical appreciation of the poem. Take care and stay safe.